Hey everybody, this is Tim Ashe. It is Wednesday, April 15th, and normally this would be tax day, a day that people don't always relish. But as we know, because of the crisis, tax day has been moved to July 15th this year, so I suspect the post office will be a little less busy, although they won't be happy about the reason why. Today I am going to give a couple updates about where things stand on the public health side of Vermont's experience with coronavirus, talk about a few updates that have been made in terms of the governor's allowances for who can be open for business at this moment in time. They're rather small and around the edges, but just want to give some sense of the governor's thinking on that. And then I'm going to talk mostly and unscripted about what's going on at the Department of Labor and with the unemployment application process and the frustration that people are having, and talk about my hopes for what we might see ahead to deal with what is an unacceptable situation. Nothing really in this crisis can be described as good news. It's one of the features of a pandemic that sometimes the news just isn't as bad, and trends can be encouraging, but the news itself is not great. Today, there were 9 new cases today. Yesterday, they were just 4, bringing the statewide total to 757. The number of people who have succumbed to COVID-19 or people who were infected with COVID-19 at the time of their deaths has now reached 30. And right now there are 33 people hospitalized with COVID-19 and another 30 who are under investigation, which, as I've described in previous updates, means that they have all the symptoms. It's suspected that they are in the hospital as a result of COVID-19, but they haven't yet had a positive test. So that number has been kind of flat, fairly steady for the last week or so. So when you hear the Commissioner of Health saying that we may be reaching a plateau, that hopefully we're at a plateau before things start coming down, it's typically based on that number of people at a given moment who are in a hospital setting because their symptoms are so acute. And so in terms of encouraging trends, we don't want to overreact or draw too much conclusion from the last week or so of holding steady at that number of people who are hospitalized and the relatively small growth in the number of new positive tests. But it's better than the alternative, which is a curve continuing to spike way up. The other piece of information that I think is really critical to share, and this speaks to what happens on the other side of this plateau, if we're at one, and that's that as of today, there have been 223 people under the age of 39 who have tested positive. I've explained before that that number will clearly and dramatically understate the number of people who've been infected who are younger, because they are less likely to have the acute symptoms that older people who contract COVID-19 will have. And as a result of their activity, can easily become vectors where they're passing it from friend to friend and to parents who then have to go off into the workplace. And so it is a worrisome sign to me as we think about what the next steps are, that so many people under the age of 39 have tested positive. Because the moment we start easing up the restrictions that we're currently under in this stay-at-home order, in this state of emergency executive order, the moment we start easing those up, people are going to want to do all the things they're normally accustomed to, being back with friends, playing sports, doing everything that younger people do, going out, restaurants, bars, you name it. And if the infection is still out there and has been suppressed largely because of our social distancing, but we allow people to re-engage, it's young people who are going to be much easier transmitters to others if we don't get that right. So food for thought as we think about what our next steps are. I'm going to give 4 brief updates of current activity that the governor has clarified earlier guidance to make sure people understand is still possible. I mention these not because they are the top issues on many people's minds, but because I think in each instance, it says something about how very comprehensive the governor's executive order has been and the complications in our lives that are presented when we're told to socially distance and stay at home, and also a little bit of insight into the challenges we'll have as we try to move safely out of this peak moment that we hopefully are in. The first, and I have heard some people ask the following question: there's no one on the roads. Why don't we have our road crews out there right now doing construction? It's like when people ask why we don't have all road construction be done at night. I've always thought that was a good question. I've never had a good answer why we don't. But people have said, why don't we have more road crews out right now when the time couldn't be better? And the short answer wanted a comprehensive stay-at-home order to keep the most people safe and the most people alive. And in that regard, I am with him 100%. And even with some of the eccentricities and things we have to work through, and even some of the things that don't at first make a lot of sense, knowing the governor's attempt was to create the largest span of included individuals to stay home and stay safe, that I am firmly behind. What they have clarified now is that municipal road crews and state road crews, the only circumstances in the short term that they are allowed to be out doing work on is if they're repairing something that is critical to safety. So if there was like a huge pothole in a municipal or state road, if there's a culvert which is collapsing, if there's a bridge that needs to be shored up because cars are at risk of toppling over with the bridge, those are the kinds of things that are currently allowed under the executive order. I believe, and I know the governor very well. He owned a construction company for many years that did site construction. And to say that those crews have to be at home right now, except in more emergency-like situations, I think is a reflection on how seriously he took this from the very beginning. And while some may say that we should allow these construction crews to be out there, I think that the opposite way of describing that would be it's a sign of how determined the governor was to snuff out this virus to the extent we could. Second issue, many people have wondered if they can do typical land record and title searches. So I was a municipal official, and whenever I would be in the clerk treasurer's office, there would be people burrowed away in thick property books. And right now, the initial order basically said all of that shuts down. Most municipal offices shut down almost immediately with the order. The governor's team has issued clarification that on a case by case, and what they put it, they literally have the word in bold, rare occasions, a clerk, treasurer, or municipal official can make exceptions on a rare basis if the records are necessary for disaster lending and some of the federal relief programs that are coming through. Some of those may require some kind of property documentation. On a case-by-case basis, that's allowed, but is highly discouraged. The next issue, so I've heard from a number of landscapers who say, why can't we be out there? We're separated, we have gloves, each employee has control of the equipment that he or she uses all day. It's not like they share it. So why can't they be out there? And that one's a question, honestly, for the governor, and I think he'll have news in the days ahead about when that can start up again. But what's been more problematic for some people is they say, wait a sec, we thought landscaping wasn't allowed, but we see some of it occurring. And the governor's team clarified today that there is an allowance for what they call minimal and basic work to prevent damage and property loss. So an example would be allowing a front yard to grow way out of control in a way that would block ice. I'm making this up. It's starting to seem a little ridiculous as I say it. But it could be some kind of maintenance of property where if you didn't take care of certain landscaping, it would mean the death of plants, plantings, trees, whatever it is. I think you get the picture after my first flubbed example. And then last, some limited banking and legal uh, in-person operations can occur if they are limited towards helping people apply for the various Small Business Administration federal relief programs. Some of those are easier to do remotely than others, and the financial institutions and legal institutions that support these programs may need to do some of that in person. Obviously, the same distancing requirements are expected to be in place, and that's all of these four examples really speak to the complex decision making that the administration has had to make under the larger umbrella of a complete order. So I expect that now we have a reduced number of cases each day, that it is likely we will start seeing a conversation about how we will ease out of this. Right now, so many people are out of work or having to work remotely, and the governor is rightly concerned, as am I, that if you just flip the light switch back up, all of the opportunity to spread infection that was there in the first place just reignites. And so it's this combination of easing things back into normal while doing so in a way that reduces the potential for spread of infection and continues to protect the very most vulnerable people who are older or have chronic illnesses from being infected at all, because we know that the symptoms for them and potential for death are much greater. So it's going to be an awkward public discussion as some activities are allowed to start to reignite. And further updates, I'll do my best to help walk you through that. I have advocated directly with the governor and the administration to open up farmers markets if conducted properly. I know that if groceries and electronics and I think even guns can be sold at the curb, that bagged, fresh, locally produced vegetables can be sold safely at the curb. And so it is my hope that we'll see an announcement in the next day or two about farmers markets opening back up. I know that many farmers who are dependent on farmers market sales for their livelihoods are needing the predictability, and they understand they'll have to operate in a different manner than the normal situation where people are walking from stand to stand. It might have to be more like ordering up front and then picking up the bag when you get there. So there are going to be some of those kinds of wrinkles as we ease back in, and ask that you send me questions whenever you have them about that. Another two quick updates before I turn to the main topic here. The first one is some people have asked if the state of Vermont is going to join a regional compact that was announced, where governors were going to join forces and make decisions about how we get out of this together. And you'll notice that the original group, it was all Democratic governors, and so it's not really clear whether it was a political statement against the president who said he was going to control when states opened back up or not. But I would like to highlight that our governor has been in close discussions with governors all over the country, but especially in the Northeast. So whether we join the compact or not really is not the important thing. It's that we're coordinating as much as possible. And the second thing is Vermont's restrictions, frankly, are much more stringent than many of the other states have been. So construction in almost every state has been allowed fully. And in Vermont, it's been almost completely shut down. So where you start from has a lot to say about the extent to which you can work in tandem with other states on easing policies. So that's just a follow-up because I received some questions from constituents about that. And then the second thing is hazard pay. I mentioned yesterday how this is very important to me to make sure that the people who are working on the front lines, especially the lower paid ones, don't wind up being the only ones who get no federal support out of this. And while we know that some employers have stepped up and offered time and a half or 20% pay boosts or a few bucks an hour, many of them haven't. Supermarket chains are a good example where one supermarket chain might give $1 an hour increase to everybody who's at the lower end. Another one might give $1.50. Well, if you were unemployed right now and got the $600 a week boost, that $600 alone is the equivalent of working full time at $15 an hour. So we expect to have committee discussions publicly as soon as Friday We have a group of senators who I asked to take a look at this have talked with House counterparts and brought some ideas to the administration, and we expect to see. We're going to have the discussion, and we need all three groups to be on board and to work together. We have to figure out exactly how it will work, but I want to move quickly if we can, and so stay tuned there. Now I'd like to talk about the primary problem that people are experiencing right now. And as I said, I'm going to be a little unscripted, and I'm not sure that this is the wisest thing to do, but feel that it's necessary. Working through this crisis has been the most unusual and stressful, if that's the right word, experience I've had in 15 years of elected office, both locally and at the state level. And there it highlights a lot of things that make public service really a special thing. Everyone banding together right out of the gates to do everything we can to prevent as many people from getting sick as possible, to keep as many people alive as possible. It's really hard to describe that sensation of serving alongside 179 other legislators and a governor and a lieutenant governor and their teams, where everyone is unified with a common purpose, at least for a period of time. There's something really powerful about that. Anybody who's been on a team or participated in group things like that knows that feeling when it comes. It's very rare, but when it does, it's really powerful. And we did that while the stress levels were just through the roof for the public that we serve. The first issue was the school shutting down, then it was the childcare facilities shutting down, then it was the restaurants and bars and all the businesses being told they had to stay home, and the unemployment hits, and then the confusion around the federal relief bill. All this stuff's been going on. And in general, we have, I think, all worked very closely together in Vermont state government to do the best we can to react. The first wave of applicants and calls and web submissions to the Department of Labor, there's a lot of latitude and patience that I think we all have to give to that experience, because it happened in an unprecedented, immediate way and basically overwhelmed a system which is designed for 2% unemployment when we were almost immediately having double digits in literally one day. And so there's an element to which we could say that properly having the capacity to meet people's needs who were desperate for information and enrollment in their unemployment and benefits in that first wave, that was a bit out of our control. What's in our control is what we do now that we know the problems it's created and the problems that we see on the horizon. And I'm not going to bore you with numbers of people who've contacted me in the last 5 weeks, or how many people have contacted other members of the Senate, members of the House, how many calls have gone into the governor, all that. I think you all know the answer is a tremendous number, and we know that every single one of them, when someone reaches out to someone like me, it's because things are really bad and they don't know what else to do. Because most people don't think, oh, my economic security has just been deleted. I have no idea how I'm going to pay my bills. Who am I going to call? A state senator? That's not how it goes. I understand this. So the fact that so many have contacted me and my peers in the Senate and in the House is a sign of just how bad it is. I have given lots of credit to the effort that has been put in at our Department of Labor. There's just no question that what they've faced is just unthinkable in terms of their normal work assignment and then what they've been asked to do. And the great challenge they have, of course, is that they might experience it as a tidal wave of applications, but each drop in that tidal wave is a human being experiencing it individually and in a very, very bad way. And so I think when they have been on the phone, like, I haven't received anyone say that they were treated rudely by one of the Department of Labor staff, that the person was short with them or anything like that. That's all an amazing credit to the people who've been doing the work. But the problems persist, and it does not take a great intellect or a complicated spreadsheet to say that the problems at this point are not acceptable. Now, it's easy for me to say, I'm not in the administration and I don't have to actually administer the program, but what we have the ability to do is offer the human perspective that we're hearing from constituents, which I've been doing very regularly in the last weeks. And I'll just give an example today. Well, three. One person saying that his experience was actually quite good. March 26th, he's told everything's going to be fine, benefits are going to come. He gets the letter saying how much it's going to be. And now here we are, 20 days later, no check, no idea when it's going to come. So that's someone who was on the lucky end, who actually got through and everything worked out fairly well. Another person today, a waitress at a local restaurant, I won't betray which one, hit redial 650 times. And this might sound outlandish, but you don't want to know how many people have told me, I've called 250 times, I've called 100 times, I've called 400 times, because people are just hitting redial, busy signal, redial, busy signal. So you can imagine how quickly that adds up. Another person who was also laid off from a restaurant after a 2-week period of never reaching a person by phone. Her father says that when she finally got through, was treated very well, got all the questions answered, got things moving, that when she hung up the phone, she started dancing around the house because she was so happy that she'd finally got through. All right, sounds kind of good, right? Except she said then she felt bad because all of her coworkers still hadn't gotten through. And so I could read you 100 cases just like that or worse. But I'm not here to blame or to say that I have some simple solution, but let me just tell you the following. First off is that this is unacceptable. I am glad the governor has used that same word. The governor relies on his team to try to fix the problems and properly communicate what's going on, and he has acknowledged this is not acceptable. The governor's team is in the process of finalizing a contract with a call center to relieve the huge volume of calls. Some of us have encouraged them to go bigger on that contract to make sure that everyone who's calling gets through. And I would rather, frankly, err on the side of having a little bit too much capacity than not enough. Because when people say they've been calling for 2 weeks and never reaching a human being, that is not the kind of public service I think that we all want to stand behind. The governor's team's also looking at some administrative fixes. Sometimes any large institution is slow to shift, and some of the policies that are in place under normal times, I think from what I understand from the commissioner and from the governor himself, have been perhaps slowing the pace of dealing with a lot of these problem calls. And the governor's team have come up with some what they believe are some administrative workarounds, which should help relieve some of the worst cases, which are tying up people and creating bottlenecks. But to put a fine point on it, the real tell of whether anything's working is if I stop getting calls and emails. I mean, that to me is my metric, because when I'm getting them, it means that people have reached the end of their rope and they've had it, they're fed up, and they think government's not serving them well. When I worked for Bernie Sanders, one of the policies he had, and my first job there was answering phones at the front desk. There were 3 phone lines. And his policy was that no phone rang in his office and rang the 3rd time. It always had to be picked up before the 3rd time. And that was an excruciating policy to actually follow through with, but taught me something about how important it is for someone who's in need to be able to talk to a human being. And so I'm going to continue to encourage the governor to do everything he can to make sure that when someone calls, they get a human being, even if it's just to take the name and number and say, we'll have to call you back. In the short term, I would take an answering machine, anything but busy signals and things telling you to try some other time, only to have the repeat experience. So we will continue to push for whatever resources are necessary to get through this backlog and get people the benefits that they need and that they're desperate to get and that they are entitled to now. And I can't say that it's going to be easy. We believe next week is when the self-employed and independent contractors will be able to start seeing the money processed by the Department of Labor and sent out in checks. I have very serious worries about the volume that that's going to create, which is why I'm asking the administration to err on the side of more capacity. And I have said, if we have too much capacity, then what we ultimately need, you will not hear a whisper of complaint from me. But the alternative is so much worse, which is people suffering unnecessarily in a bureaucratic morass, which is what they're experiencing right now. So I don't mean to sound like everything's easy or you snap a finger and it just solves the problem, but I don't want you to come away feeling that anybody in the Senate, and I don't think in the House or the administration, feels this is acceptable. And so now we have to control what we can control, manage the flow of calls and web submissions that are coming in so that people can get treated the way they should by their state government. So with that, I'm going to wrap. Tomorrow, I'm going to have my first guest. I'll send out an email to my email list announcing who that's going to be. I believe it's going to be a chief nursing officer from one of our state hospitals, and look forward to trying out that format and asking what it's like for the nurses on the front line, what it's been like preparing, experiencing, and then what they see ahead. So with that, I'll ask you to stay safe, and I'll see you tomorrow. Thanks a lot.